credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Vitruvian Man podcast, a podcast centered around self-mastery. I'm your host, Zach Shankin. Today, I'm joined by David Cecchini. David is an outdoorsman, fitness and men's health advocate, a self-reliance strategist, a seeker of ancient wisdom, and a Renaissance man in my eyes, for sure. On top of that, he's a really high character guy with an amazing story to share. So I'm excited for our discussion today. David, welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks so much, Zach. I'm excited to be here and look forward to speaking with you.
Absolutely, bro. It was very serendipitous. Obviously, I think we're both people that don't believe in circumstance or coincidence, rather. And it was cool. Kyle made the connection. So shout out to boy Kyle. I'm not sure if he listens to all of these podcasts, but hopefully when he sees your name in the title, he'll tune in for this. So I want to give him a shout out for making that connection. Obviously, you guys connected for the first time. We're just getting to know each other, and for whatever he knows of me and views me of, and likewise with you, I think he felt like connecting us would be a good idea. And certainly that first call that we had, I mean, it ended up going organically for like an hour and a half and could have been probably a podcast in its own right. So I'm glad that we got to sit down, and I'm excited to explore some of the stuff I don't know, dive into some of the questions I had from that conversation, just hear a little bit more about your story, because I think it's a powerful one to share, and I think you bring a lot of good energy to it.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, that was pretty much exactly where I wanted to go with this, was just to continue off our last conversation. And funny that you mentioned Kyle, because I had just found him kind of randomly on Instagram, and I was like, this kid looks like he's cool. And I just hit him up and was like, let's chat. And then we had hardly gotten into much of the conversation sort of theme that we had spoken about. But it was just kind of, he knew somewhere in the back of my mind that you and I would get along. So here we are.
Here we are. Very, very cool. Obviously, you're calling in. I assume, are you still posted up in Montana right now?
Yes, sir. I'm in my abode in Montana, Northwest Montana, Missoula.
Sovereign land, God's country out there for sure.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's the place to be.
I kind of want to open things up there and like have it be a back-traced origin story, but I always like to open up with letting people tell a little bit about their origin story to, I call it like self-mastery, whether you want to call it self-actualization, self-development, but kind of coming into your own. And it's a long story, so we can kind of pick apart the details, but I'm curious for you what that was like on a high level. But was there a major inflection point, either a life event, a person that came into your life, a book you read that really changed things for you and started things off? But kind of walk me through that.
Yeah, actually all of the above, man. So I think there's a point in our lives as we, flee the coop from mom and dad's house, where we're kind of on autopilot, like being raised. And, I had a really loving family, still do, pretty privileged upbringing, I would say. Parents were like, you need to go to college. And I was just like, okay. So I didn't really have that, autonomy set in place before heading off to school. And I went to Virginia Tech. So big school, big party school. And I just, my freshman year was 2011. So it was still kind of in that pre-social media age where everyone was watching, Blue Mountain State and, the American Pie days, where everyone was like, this is what college is supposed to be like, and was just acting a fool and did a lot of things that most, guys in college do when they're that age, 19, 20 years old, and ended up getting in trouble a few times for alcohol related charges, which not uncommon, but definitely was kind of world shattering and paradigm shifting, to the point where my parents were like, we're not paying for you to go to college to be this guy. And I was not doing well in school and just kind of let the party lifestyle get the best of me. And so they actually forced me to withdraw from that semester. So, the world was ending in my eyes, like all my friends and, this image that I had of like this essentially frat boy, even though I wasn't in a fraternity. I was a lacrosse player, but it's close enough. And so I kind of went home and worked in like a factory and just like was hating my life, and definitely spiraled into depression because I'd gone from like substance, and we'll get into that kind of, journey along the way in this conversation, but, drinking all the time. I was like huge into smoking weed, and that was like what I surrounded my day around. So when I withdrew from that, literally and figuratively, my brain chemistry was just jacked up. I was away from my friends, away from school. This was like second semester freshman year. So it was like right in the beginning. And I ended up being encouraged by my family, like, hey, you should go talk to somebody, some counselor, therapist, whatever. And I was open to it because I was lonely, and I couldn't talk to my parents because it was just like guilt and disappointment all the time. And so I actually met with this woman in my hometown who's a licensed therapist, and she had a very interesting approach to therapy. And it was more along the lines of meditation, journaling, you know, feeling your vibes and your frequency. Like she was very much like I hate to use the word woo woo, but she was woo woo as woo woo gets, but she was awesome. And so that really kind of opened my eyes to synchronicity and the unseen realm of the world. And it just kind of reintroduced me to this like path of spirituality that I kind of felt as a young child, like 5, 6, 7 years old. And I started meditating 30 minutes to 40 minutes in the morning and at night, just to get myself back to equilibrium. And I had some like wild transcendental experiences. I actually up reading like a lot of Deepak Chopra books. Like I was on like that Oprah book club line. It was wild, man. So that was kind of like the start of my self-development in terms of spirituality, meditation, self-development. But then it took a turn downhill again for like 10 years. But yeah, that I always kind of had it in the back of my mind that, I was meant to be doing more with my life. So
Yeah, that's amazing. And I definitely think that it's interesting that I find, for whatever reason, and maybe it's, like as Jung would talk about, like it's as the ego is developing, it's going to take something kind of very visceral to force you to really take a look at that. And the unfortunate reality for a lot of people, like heartbreak, loss, tragedy, substance are the things that kind of make us wake up. But I think that I actually just wrote a thread literally today on Twitter about this, but it's about like transmuting that pain. And if you are fortunate enough to be left still alive after whatever the hard thing is, you have a huge opportunity to share that story with the world and create meaning, whether it's meaningful works of art, be a better partner, teacher, athlete, whatever it may be. And it's kind of like your obligation. I mean, you're faced with the choice, right? You either retreat and just kind of play the victim card and say like, I had this hard thing happen and I'm just going to hold it, or you can kind of weaponize it.
Yeah, absolutely. Weaponize it. That's a really good way to put it. And for a while I was weaponizing it to, because I kind of had this ultimatum, like if I went through a certain amount of, progressive steps into like, proving to myself and my parents that I was capable of going back to school, then I could be allowed to go back to tech. So I really was kind of looking back now, I was doing it for the right reasons, and then it turned into the wrong reasons. It went from like a spiritual journey, from overcoming this like situationally induced depression and chemical withdrawal, if you think about it, to like, I have to do this in order to go back to school to keep doing the things that I was doing in the past that got me to the situation, which, I'm 30 years old now, and this is 10 years ago. So I can definitely see a lot clearer in the past. But I think one of the hardest things to do after weaponizing those traumatic experiences would be to continue to do the things you're supposed to be doing for the right reasons and not be like, well, things are better now, so I can take my foot off the pedal,
Yeah, it's a really interesting underlying issue, and it's this weird self-defeating nature about humans where we have this like really short memory, and whatever it is, like you get in really good shape. Okay, now I can slack a little bit on the diet, or I can skip a day in the gym to go have fun, or I can go out drinking, whatever. You build your business to a certain amount of revenue. The stuff that got you there, you stop doing because, oh, it's coming in, like money's looking good, like let me take a break. boom, somebody else takes your spot, whatever, or something slips on the back end. And it's kind of like all
Mm-hmm.
pervasive. Even with those spiritual practices, there is a discipline required. Like you can't just meditate to a point of transcendence and then stop meditating. The point is to play the infinite game and keep going. But I'm curious, like you touched on the fact that you were like pretty open to
Mm-hmm.
sitting with this therapist who was relatively woo woo, and as the self-proclaimed lax frat boy that you were, raised in modern Western America, this is not part of our upbringing. We're not raised by kind of these Eastern ideas. I certainly was not.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the last probably few years for me, I've really kind of expanded my mind and been open to these ideas, but it's been kind of slowly. It's like initially an intellectual pursuit, just reading stuff. So do you think it was the gravity of the situation that was like, I'll try anything to kind of get kind of peace, or were you drawn to it? Like, why were you so open to that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Zach. So, the more that you ask me about this situation, it was 10 years ago. It was like 2012. So almost 11 years ago. More and more is coming back to me. So, I was raised in a Christian household. So I always had the belief of, a higher power and a divine sort of backdrop to this physical reality that we live in. And I think that, I had so many layers built up between that divine source and myself and my ego, so to speak, like many layers of ego, whether it was my social circle, my looks, my relationships at the time, friends, substance definitely, and just like this kind of image that I had built up in my mind. When all those things kind of shit hit the fan, so to speak, all of that was like wiped away. So it was just like a direct line between, all of my friends, all of these ideas that I had about myself were just wiped away. And so I was kind of left in like the dark room, so to speak, of just like by myself, literally in a dark room. I ended up going to jail for 5 days, but that was like after a month and a half long like trial period of like, pretty much I drank and drove, got pulled over for going 11 miles an hour and a 25, didn't hurt anybody, didn't like, I got pulled over for like putting my car in park at a red light, which is insane. And I ended up having a mandatory minimum sentence in the state of Virginia. And, you know, that was crazy enough, but coming home was heartbreaking. But having that, hey, you might go to jail for 5 days up to a year in the back of your mind was like, it was traumatizing. And I ended up going to court on like the day before Thanksgiving, which was crazy. And I remember just like being in the courtroom, and the prosecutor and the arresting officer were like, all right, this guy, he clearly made a mistake. Like he didn't hurt anybody. Let's try to give him the sentence below what we're going to give him. And the judge was like, nah, this kid is like some white kid from the North. Like he's got his parents here with his lawyer. Like let's make him pay essentially. And I deserved every bit of that sentencing. So when I say I was in the proverbial dark room, it was actually a dark room. It was a cell with, luckily the guy who I was cellmates with was like this kid from JMU, James Madison University, who got busted for like selling ecstasy. And he was in there for 6 months. And he had like a stack of books like this tall. He was really like, gave me like Jesus vibes. Like he had long hair and was just like, you're going to be fine, man. Like read this book. Like it could have gone a lot worse, put it that way. But I was in with like murderers and child rapists and things like that. So I was like really like kind of like, this could be your life, dude, if you don't get it together. So to answer your question, like those moments alone were just like enough for me to be completely open to, when you say hit rock bottom, the only way you can go is up. And so I knew that what I was doing in like the physical realm of, harming myself physically, with drugs and alcohol, or just like not really paying attention to the little signs that were given to me along the way. That really opened me up to any possibility. So, yeah, dude, it was wild. It's pretty wild to think about now as like an adult who's gone through so much more between then and now, and been like, yeah, man, you went through some shit, but you had yourself and nobody else to thank for it. So it's interesting.
Definitely very interesting. I'm really curious. I want to dive into the 5 day, which I'm sure felt at the time like an eternity.
Mm.
What was the book that he encouraged you to read?
It was the one, it was, I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but it was the one with like, where the guy like talks to a gorilla. I don't know if you know what that is. It was honestly so long ago, but he had like, I kind of flipped through it, and I was scared at the time. So like my focus like wasn't there. Um, but he like directed me towards like autobiography of a yogi, and placing your awareness and consciousness in an area outside of your body was kind of like the gist of the books that he was giving me. So I was able to kind of like meditate in my cell and just kind of get out of there. And I think that honestly like leads me to be who I am today, just because like we as Americans, and everybody else who lives in freelance, you have this like idea and sense of freedom, but as soon as it's taken away from you, that becomes like a much more tangible thing. It's like, wow, I have only 4 inches by 10 inches of sunlight coming through my room a day. Like that freedom is gone. So it's like, even though I was only in there for 5 days, it was a taste of hell, in my opinion. So yeah, man, we can get into it if you want. Let's go for it.
Yeah, definitely. That was definitely the gates opening for your awareness of this
Hmm.
world, and also these different practices that start kind of allowing you to see what your consciousness is and also is capable of.
Hmm.
So how long was the period where you started to go see the quote unquote woo woo lady? And then what was like that? What did it look like? And then did you end up going back to Virginia Tech as this newly found Western yogi?
Yeah, dude, it was crazy. So interesting. We'll call her Linda. That's not her name, but it starts with an L. So Linda, her and I pretty much met. This happened, I got arrested in September, and then like 48 hours later, I was back in Pennsylvania where I grew up. And a week later, I was sitting in her office, like crying my eyes out, purging all this like negativity, a lot of fear. And my court date was 2 months later in late September. So, or excuse me, late November. There we go. And so it was about 2 months of practice, and I was reading like some synchronous book by Deepak Chopra. I was, you know, meditating, praying, journaling. Um, but it still had this like idea in the back of my mind, like it's very likely that you're going to go to jail and you don't know for how long. And so I was like straight clenched. So I don't think I got as much out of that as I could have, even though I was doing the practice. There were times where I straight up astral projected without even trying. I was like floating around my family's like living room while I was like up in my bed, just like vampire mode. Um, yeah, and I ended up going back to Virginia Tech the next semester because I had gotten like this was like the second or third time I'd gotten an alcohol related charge at Virginia Tech and within like a semester. I guess, out of a school of like 30,000 people and a bunch of drunk kids, like I was especially stupid. So, get in trouble for like a fake ID at a bar, like minor possession, whatever, minor stuff. And then I got the DUI, and I was like, okay, it's all come crashing down. So I had not only trouble with the law, but I had trouble with the university. So after I'd spent the 5 days in jail, which went without incident, thankfully, I got out, and I had this like, when you see in the movies where people come out of jail and they're like looking around, they see the birds flying, and you're like, oh wow, like this is so great. That's how it was, man. But then I also had in the back of my mind, you need to go and sit in front of you know, uh, a council at Virginia Tech to like plead your case as to why they should let you back in school because you're literally a problem in their eyes. And I was a freaking menace, dude. and and so I guess I've always been pretty good at like interviewing, and so I approached it at a point of like these were like assistants to the dean and big time people at the university. They're like, why should we let you stay? And I don't know what I said to them or how, but it's usually 3 strikes and you're out. But somehow they let me stay, and that was like the ultimate uh, sort of event that led to like my next step in my life. So my parents were like, okay, if they think you're suitable enough to go and you've made some progress, you can go back now. And so I went back, and I had to do like court ordered alcohol classes, like at the, I was in just a crappy place for like a year. And so I was able to go back, and like I had like the threat of like being drug tested, and like my favorite thing to do was to like smoke weed with my friends and like longboard around campus, you know. And so I was like, oh, I can't be smoking, and like so I was like on the straight and narrow for like, you know, 3 months of that spring semester, and going to class, doing really well, super motivated because I had just like essentially gotten a new lease on life, literally, and got my freedom back. So yeah, it was wild, man. I ended up going back and then was good for a couple months, and then I think I found mushrooms for the first time and was like, all right, I think you're going a little too hard on yourself. But that was like a false sense of you know safety, so to speak.
So was that the beginning of a backswing? And then what did that result in? Like did you end up like, I don't know, like what was the reception? I guess there's the act, like the structural level of the school. Like we see this kid
Mhm.
relatively as a problem, but maybe we'll give him a chance. But like, what were your friend groups like communication? Like, did you rejoin the team? Like, were you able to like effectively reintegrate, or was there kind of a schism?
No, it was like Return of the King, man. It was awesome. Like I don't say that like, oh, I think I'm some awesome dude, but like I was pretty integral in my friend group. Like they really, I love my friends to this day, and they still, love me. And it was like he's back, like lots of pats on the back kind of thing. It wasn't like, oh, this guy got fucking DUI, like he's a loser. It was like he's back. We're in it, baby. Because like how it is in college, like everybody will like get behind the wheel of a car and like drive down the street to their friend's house, and then they shouldn't. And obviously, I shouldn't have. But it wasn't like, oh, he like killed somebody and now he's back. Like we got to be like afraid of him. It was like, oh, he messed up and got the book thrown at him. But um, yeah, so I actually at the time I had broken up with a girl my freshman year, and then I was like super lonely and vulnerable. And like as a child at the time that I was in a young man's body, I was like super vulnerable and like convinced her to go get back together with me. And it was just like a terrible codependent relationship. And then when I got back to school, back on my feet, we ended up breaking up again. So that was just like, it was just like weirdness after weirdness. And I look back at it now. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I was like, I had no direction, and I also had no moral compass at the time. So even though I had this like spiritual awakening, so to speak, I was far from being this like good person. I always think that there's this quote, I forget who said it. It's like the absence of evil is not an automatic indicator of good. And so even though I wasn't hurting anybody, I wasn't harming myself as much, I was still really self-centered. And that, it took me years to like really truly forgive myself for that. But yeah, it was a wild ride, and it ended up getting my first internship that semester. So I kind of had felt like, I had made so much progress, and I was in Florida and started doing CrossFit because that was when like CrossFit was like the shit, and 2012, 2013, and so I ended up like picking up some pretty good habits. But at this time, I was still so far from being a good man. So.
Well, you keep kind of referring to that transformation from, and obviously like we're always going to be critical of our former selves. I even
Sure.
think of like myself a year ago today. There was so much I didn't know. I've learned through my entrepreneurial journey, connecting with a bunch of people, relationships, etc. Like we're just constantly evolving. So it's always like you look back and be like, I was so young, so naive. But like you are kind of alluding to maybe more of a large transformation from a self like egocentric view of the world and like
Mm.
lack of externally focused perspective to the man that is here today. And do you think it was more of a slow unraveling, and were there formal methods to start breaking those walls down, or was it just kind of like trial and error along that decade long route of try this, meet these people, and kind of like move along?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So it was definitely a lot of trial and error. And back to what we were talking about, getting to a certain point in your journey, whether it's business or a spiritual practice, and just being like, oh, I'm good now. I'm distracted by other things to not be so, you know, focused on the things that I need to be focused on. So like during those times, I was, I was more involved in my schoolwork, and I was kind of focused on my internship and things like that. But yeah, man, I don't know. I definitely stopped meditating as much. I think that was like a huge thing for me was meditation and being connected to that source and that divine guidance, so to speak. And over the last 5, 6, 7 years, I was in places that I didn't necessarily want to be and with people I didn't necessarily want to be with, relationship wise. I think it really comes down to being intentional with your day and your life. That if you're not intentional, you get like swept away in the tide of like life. And so, over the last like 10 years, like I still drank on the weekends, smoked weed every day. I lived in Colorado. Weed was legal, still is. But I think we talked about this briefly in our conversation that there was a point in my life where I was like super into like the fantasy novels. I was a really imaginative kid drawing. I had like a really beautiful outlook on life. And then as soon as I got older and started like drinking as a teenager, like the world went like straight up grayscale, like no color. It was like in order to feel something, I had to drink, I had to do mushrooms, I had to smoke weed, just to like feel something. And that sounds sad, and it is, but I think that, we can go into my journey of sobriety in a second, but I was afraid that if I didn't do those things, the world would continue to be grayscale. And what I've found out in this journey of sobriety is that being close to source and God, that is where the beauty comes from, which is why as a child, you're innocent. You have these like really pure thoughts. That's why the world is beautiful then. So
When you look back at a lot of these like self-abandoning behavioral patterns, like substance abuse and I don't know, just kind of like continually taking steps forward and then 2 steps back and a little bit of self-defeating, like where do you think that came from? Especially like I think I also would self-describe as like stable foundation, very blessed upbringing. I wasn't ever worried about another pair of shoes or a meal or like playing sports at
Right.
school, like had a car to get to and from school. So there was no like, I don't know, the struggle. I didn't come from the mud.
Yeah.
And so those are the typical things where at least what we hear in modern like whatever people point to and they're like, these are the things that lead to people that commit crimes and these are the things that lead to like the most substance abuse, like broken homes or whatever. So why do you
Right.
think you turned to that, even given that stable upbringing? Like what inside with the ability to look back now was that?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. I think that there's a very delicate balance between having a really crappy home life and being, the stereotypical criminal or drug addict, what have you, and then the super privileged upbringing, which, my family was middle class, like both working parents. I didn't have like an absorbent amount of wealth or anything like that. But I think that having too much comfort in your life, I think it really comes down to being like super comfortable. It lacks that ability to identify where you want to go in life, who you are as a person, just like that critical thinking ability to go out and be a good person. Like my parents are awesome. Like we just talked that they were here in Missoula for 5 days, and I spent every minute with them. And I think that you know, as a young man in this world, it's hard to because I've always been so hard on myself. I think that's part of it. Being super critical. I always like when I was a young kid, I always looked up to like my brother and his friends, and I always wanted to be the cool kid. I always wanted to be somebody else that I wasn't. So I never truly embraced my own identity and strengths and gifts and things like that. I pretty much took my strengths and gifts and put them to the back burner and was like, well, nobody cares about those. I have to be like everybody else. And at the time, that was, envying my older brother and his friends who were all like partying in high school and on the football team. And, I think I just abandoned my own journey somewhere early along the way and just like kind of got swept up in the crowd. And I think that, I think we talked about this a little bit in our first conversation. It was like a vicious cycle between like recognizing who you could be, not doing anything about it, and self-medicating to make yourself feel a little bit better about, a missed opportunity or wasted time, or the fact that you're, just wishy-washy. And that to me was like, for a long time, it was pretty haunting. So I ended up like continuing that cycle over and over and over again, until recently, actually. So,
Dude, I think I'm so glad that you brought that up. And it's an underlying, I guess, driving factor in all the externally focused work that I do with other people, even just the content I put out, this podcast, like empowering people to work towards a life of meaning. Because, and especially I think the masculine spirit craves that overcoming of obstacles, pursuing,
yes.
entering the world and doing something. And so like I sympathize or empathize heavily with the looking for the problem. I specifically remember,
Yes.
like
Dude.
I grew up in Christian education as well. And so like we would have chapel at my Christian school every single Wednesday, and like they would bring people in to do these chapels. Sometimes it was internal people, sometimes they would bring them in. Almost unanimously, like everybody, when they were telling, as Christians call it, their testimony, but as normal people call it, your life story, it always had these moments, right? Like searching for that inflection moment. And it typically came from, as we talked about and kind of started this conversation, some sort of dark point, some sort of I fucked up or lost somebody and then, had to turn to God. That's like the come to Jesus story classically. But I think the come to yourself story is very much the same. And so I literally remember sitting there in those squeaky chairs, wearing my khaki shorts, like sitting there, like my life is so good. Like, what's my testimony? What's my thing? And the really unfortunate reality is that those thoughts, like the pain finds you. Like it was coming down the road and I didn't know. And to whatever degree I manifested the pain in my life just by thinking those thoughts, I don't know. I don't think regret's the right word. I try to live without regret, but I apologize to anyone else that those troubles also befell. So like my encouragement, I guess, to the people that are out there and you don't have like a massive sense of meaning in your life and it was pretty okay, like middle of the road, not like you said, it just like middle class, kind of this like almost, I think true hell is that middle line, that mediocrity, that like eternal limbo of just not too good, not too bad,
being lukewarm.
Yeah, like it just, life needs the end points. It needs the super, super high highs. And I mean, there's so many tropes around it, right? Like you can't have flowers without rain. You wouldn't appreciate the sun if there wasn't darkness, all that. But it's true, like in a super visceral way. You see it, like I had an internship one summer when I was at university out in San Diego, and I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, like very normal state, very normal place, suburbs, normal weather cycles, like nothing crazy positive or negative, right? Kind of a little bit of that middle ground. And so when I went out there, I mean, it's paradise on earth, right? Like perfect temperature, perfect humidity. It's just amazing and beautiful. But the people that I worked with and lived there, like every day I'm walking into work starry-eyed because we can see the beach from the office. I'm like, guys, this is insane. And they just live there and they're like, yeah, I mean, it's another day. And it's crazy about, I don't know, we humans, because we're so good at adaptation, we are self-defeating in that way where we can kind of forget those blessings. It's why I am so big on a daily gratitude practice as a discipline rather than like a nice to have, because it forces you to acknowledge the abundance that is already at your hands. And I know we've wandered a little bit from the meaning and struggle thing, but I do think that finding that thing to overcome is super critical, and your spirit is going to search and find something. And so if you don't take it consciously and, as you put it earlier, intentionally, it's going to find you in very likely a non-ideal way, whether it be you attract a toxic, violent relationship because you just need a little bit of struggle in your life, or you enter into a job or stay in a job that is not super fulfilling, but gives you a little bit of that angst and that overcoming, or maybe it's a drinking habit, maybe it's whatever it is, it could just be being kind of a shit person to like waiters, or like having these random moments of outbursts. But like, if we don't seek out those ways to exercise the resistance in a positive way, training, martial arts, something positive, it really does kind of bubble.
It does bubble, Zach, and I don't think we've wandered at all, really. I think this is right on track. And, back to what you said about like being shitty to waiters or someone, I think that it's funny that you bring up San Diego because, like, to me, Southern California, no offense to those who live there, I'm sure you're all great, but it like having too much good in your life is very much like that's why the whole Karen complex comes about. It's like they're looking for something to overcome in their day because their day is sick. They've got the money, they've got their whatever. And to me, it's like, as a man or woman, doesn't matter. I think that there's like the hero's journey. I think that there's a reason there's that archetype in literature, in Holy Scripture of, you know, Samson and the lion, David versus Goliath, because that's a struggle that's happening within ourselves on a daily basis. There's those evil voices in your head that you have to overcome. So, for me, that's why I always say if you're not burning out physically, you're going to burn out mentally. That's why I think training in the gym is so important. Going rucking a mountain, doing something that's going to make you feel like question yourself. Because if you're so sure of yourself and you have this like unearned confidence, which I'm speaking from personal experience, that it's like you're gonna be humbled. And I remember, I think it was your conversation with Peyton Elroy where you were like, I had a feeling that something bad was coming. Like I expected it to come. Um, and for me, I was like, I kind of had that feeling too, but I was gonna make it happen right now. Like I was my own executioner. And so I think that now in my life, it's been such a blessing to be able to talk to guys like you and anybody else who's, I could potentially save them some time and pain to just be like, you know, just be consistent in your day, be consistent with how you treat yourself, most importantly, in your journey and other people that you love and strangers. Because the way that I'm able to be so like quote vulnerable and like share my story of like all my massive fuck ups is because they make me so much more available to people to talk to on a level that's like deeper than skin, right?
Huge, so huge. I love that you said vulnerability, very synchronistic, because the last line of like the piece that I wrote today on sharing your pain, transmitting your pain, and telling your story is vulnerability. The word comes from the Latin root vulnus, which literally means wound. And
Ooh, didn't
that,
know that.
like the line that I put, I'm going to probably even misquote myself, but it was basically like, true vulnerability is showing the battle scars and telling the stories on how you got them, right? Like
Yeah.
show literally the wounds that you have, and it shows like true strength. It's why vulnerability is a trait that is really admirable. It like strengthens bonds relationally very well, whether it's within a romantic relationship or between colleagues or compatriots or whatever. Like when somebody sees somebody open up about those wounds and basically say like, this hurt me a lot, and this is where theoretically if you jabbed at, you could hurt me, but I'm comfortable and confident and strong enough to show it right in front of you. I think that it brings forth a lot of admiration, and it's super, super powerful.
Yeah, to your point, brother, it's like I've seen the opposite from myself and other people that I'm close to. It's like those vulnerabilities they try to protect so hard and shield from the public that it's like I've been hurt by this X amount of times in my life, so I'm gonna not talk about it. It's gonna be my shield that no one will have to know about it. That way, no one can attack me from it. And so, what I think is the most amazing quality of a human being is honesty. And there's a lot of things that if you're someone like myself who in the past has struggled with drinking and smoking weed, I never once considered myself an addict per se, but I was self-medicating a loss of time and purpose on my journey. Like I felt like as a kid that I would be somebody special, and I was living a life full of mediocrity, that I was like lying to myself, being dishonest with like my actions, meaning like, oh, I'm gonna go out back at a family function and like smoke weed and try to hide it, and then come back and be all stoned, and then like nobody's gonna know. But like that's like sneaky, shady shit, right? And I always love the fact that you know, that's probably why I ended up like stopping all of this, is because I was like, I'm living a dishonest life. Doesn't mean I'm like outwardly lying to people, but I'm lying to myself. I'm lying to my future self and my future legacy of perhaps children one day. And I like that when you introduced me as like seeker of ancient wisdom, it's like I try to learn from all cultures. And being in Montana, there's a heavy Native American population here, and I love like the lore of different things. Like I've got Bigfoot on my water bottle just because I think it's cool and kind of creepy. And I've had some weird experiences in the woods. Won't get into that right now, but I guess they have like certain cultures in the native, whether it's native Alaskans, native Montanans, each major animal, like big animal, like whether it's a grizzly or a wolf, that spirit has an attribute to it, whether it's strength in the bear, loyalty in the wolf. For a Sasquatch, that's just as real to many cultures as the bear. And that particular animal, we'll call it, that attribute is honesty, because it drives such like a primordial fear of like who you are as a person, that you think you could meet your death anytime. And it's like, just like Memento Mori, like that's your thing, right? Is like, are you able to be honest with yourself that if you were to die today or in this very moment, could you be happy with it? And for myself, I was like consistently, doubling down on the fact that I wasn't worthy of success or worthy of love, because I was like, I lost somehow along the way, and like my identity and who I was as a person and what I defined me as a man. And yeah, I was like, I need to be more honest with myself. And so here we are, 6 months into my journey of sobriety, still very, very fresh. But compared to, where I was a year, 2 years ago, man, I feel on top of the world. Like that color has just bled into the landscape of my vision every day. It's like, and it's honest. It's honest happiness. It's honest joy. So where I am right now is just like a really good place. So that's why I feel confident in sharing my story and, telling guys like you and having these conversations.
Man, that's beautiful. I love that you touched on symbols and kind of that universal language. I know earlier you touched on as well the hero's journey. It's something I have like a whole week of my program talking about the hero's journey and purpose and stuff. And that ubiquity, the fact that it has been said in different shades with different symbols, with different whatever, the languages of their time and their people across all of recorded history as we know it. And we don't have to get into the revisionist history kind of meta narrative, but it's amazing. And I think it's universal. And like you said, it speaks to the internal story. We're all trying to use art to explain what the hell's going on the inside. And we in the West, for sure, we've kind of like pedestalized and almost fetishized science. And so this like loss of magic, romanticism, and symbolism, we're starting to see the fruits of that abandonment. And it's kind of chaos and directionlessness and degeneracy at like a social and societal level. But the people that and the community groups that are still holding on to it, like whether it's native tribes or Orthodox Catholics or whatever, like you can throw stones at all of those groups. You can be like, oh, we have science to prove that your nature gods are no longer real. Like you can just be a critic, or you can look at how those people are able to show up for the people that they love, or how their communities flourish, and how more joy and present. Like I was invited to dinner. One of my friends, he's like much more, he's like a very traditional Catholic, his family, very traditional. Like they have the garden sculptures. They prayed in Latin before our meal, like very traditional. And it was like, when I walked into that, it was intense. And when I walked into that home, like there's a ton of kids scooting around. I mean, a classic Catholic family, like person printing factory, but like it was just immediately like I was hit with this wall of, this is a home that is filled with love. And I'm not here to like, it would be a waste and almost like egocentric to like attack ideology or get into theology. I mean, I was raised, like I said before, kind of a non-denominational Christian. So, but I was really into the apologetics thing, defending the faith, like, here's why you're wrong, here's why we're right kind of thing.
Sure.
But it's just missing the mark so much. It's why I have like a large critique of a lot of those religious schools, even Catholicism
course.
included. But it just, when I look at the beauty of what those types of things create, when you believe in the symbols, when you believe in the saints, when you believe in something that's going on here, and speak to, I don't know, the beauty of the human spirit and what that experience can look like amongst us, it just is so transcendent, you know?
Yeah, dude, that is freaking beautiful. And I couldn't agree with you anymore because, you know, whether people like to attack certain faiths or, well, they did this and no one's ever done this, but they did that. And who cares, man? Like if you come from a family who's genuinely, or if you witness a family or a tribe of people who are practicing abundance, whether it's abundance of life, meaning children, abundance with friendship, bringing people into their home, um, it's just magical, man. And I think that there's like a resurgence of traditionalism in the best way possible because so many of us, myself included, which I think a large portion of what I'm about to say is what's affected me in my life, which is cynicism and abandonment of God, abandonment of true belief in a moral compass, and just doing what everybody else is doing. Like, can't spell masses without asses. And, you know, I think that every time I would, you know, if I was in like a fog of like, say, marijuana or had a couple beers and someone was like, you know, you're really hurting your gains if you're drinking. And I would just cringe and tune it out because like I was not just ready to hear that truth. And I think that there is objective truth in life, and some people won't agree with that, and that's fine. Um, but I think the objective truth behind the principle of love and abundance and community is something that has stood the test of time. And only now in 2023, in the last 50, 60 years, have we gone away from those community dynamics. Like there's a case study in, I think it was like upstate New York, where there was a big, heavy, you know, Italian Catholic immigration thing where they had like people well into their hundreds. They had like 4 generational households. Everyone had family meals all the time. And then like the factories came into town and everything just like kind of got, you know, parents weren't living with their children anymore. And people started dying of like heart disease at like 50. And like the life expectancy just like shot down. And they call them blue zones, I think is the scientific term, where there's people well into their hundreds. And they all have the one thing in common, which is love. And I think that people can be like, oh, well, you can't be in love and treat yourself crappy in your body and still live to 100. Well, some people can, you know?
Dude, I'm so glad you brought up blue zones. That's literally immediately what I thought of. And I had the, and we still haven't released it, which is on both of us. But I had Ryan Iola for a part 2. He's a good friend of mine with a podcast, and we discussed the world of learning about nutrition and almost like the harm in neuroticism and like over fixation and like orthorexia, because you learn all the data and then it's like, oh, that's bad for me, and then the fear itself and the stress is going to do more bad for you than anything else. Like in those blue zones, when they're observed and like they're taking the data down, these people are eating like pasta, they're drinking wine. Granted, it's organic and like the ingredient profiles are probably better than the certain soil we have in the States, but the big takeaway, like you said, is just these are houses full of love. Like the Harvard study is like really famous. It came out like post COVID. It was kind of observing isolation, and the being isolated or feeling emotionally isolated is net equivalent, at least in this study, was found to be smoking, I think it was 15 cigarettes a day to your like health and stress. Like the number one whatever the opposite of a comorbidity is, like health indicator for longevity is
coefficient.
Community. Yeah, coefficient. Like it's community. And we especially in the fitness thing, like, you know, we start to hit the really big ones: nutrition, movement, kineticism, mobility, like training, lean muscle mass. Like there's all these things that we think come to mind, but the crazy part is it's not true. And it speaks to, like you said, the transcendence of love, like a power that is clearly above ourselves. It's above the physical. It's above the animal. It's above, like, there is clearly a spiritual experience going on with us. Anyone who's fallen in love, anyone who's cried because of a song, anyone who's looked into the eyes of a child knows what we're talking about.
For sure.
Felt it. It's like, it's almost beyond the word. of love. It's beyond the word of God. It's beyond whatever language we try to describe. That's why I really like Eckhart Tolle's work, is because he spends like the first part of The Power of Now, like a good chunk of the book, just trying to remind you, like, whatever words you want to use, that's fine. Like, get away from the words. We're talking about the present moment. We're not talking about whatever ideology you're bringing to it. And I think that, again, with the religion thing, is most of the hang up for people. They just want to use their language that they're comfortable with. But that feeling, searching for that abundant feeling, that present moment, that love, whether it comes to you through meditation or whatever you want to call it, prayer, like, I don't know, seeking that out is so, the best word that continues to come to mind is transcendent. It's like universal. It's the hero story across all time.
Dude, the hero story. You've got a gift for words, my man. I'm just like sitting here, just like smiling and nodding, and like, just like I'm somewhere else, man. I've got this sick mountain view right now, and I'm just like up there, just like, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
No,
You kind of just blew my mind there for a second, brother.
I appreciate the praise. And for those listening, that was organic, and I'm gonna just have to leave it in. I know it's a bit self-aggrandizing to have a podcast in the first place, so I appreciate the kindness.
No, not at all, man.
I can reciprocate it as well. I mean, you're super, super articulate, and I'm glad you're also having a very like abundant visual experience as well, because I'm blessed and fortunate to have like two great windows behind me, and I'm hearing the birds chirping. Hopefully that's not coming through the mic, but
no, not at all, man.
Anyway, we're getting a little lovey-dovey here at the end, but
yeah, man. Well, let's get hard and weird. That sounded weird, but back to what you said about like, I think that if we could get into like sort of the doom pill kind of thing, because of its pervasiveness across society right now. Back to like the loneliness and isolation thing that you were talking about. I think that is, really important to talk about, because whether or not you have 100 friends, if you're a younger person in college, you're in a sorority, you're in a fraternity, you're on a sports team, and you have like this feeling that like something's wrong inside of you because you're not like other people. Well, just understand that like most people that you think that you're not like, they are probably thinking the same thing too. So it's like this big, the more you talk about, and this goes back to what we were saying about your story, what hurts, the more you talk about it and you find someone that you can kind of relate to and go off of, you'll start to realize that you are not so alone and isolated with these things. And I think that one of the things that, if we go back to my story real quick about like, well, I had this event happen in my early 20s, and then I kind of like was good for a little bit and then kind of dicked around for like the last 10 years. It's because I felt truly alone in a lot of ways. And it's not to be like, oh, boo-hoo, Dave. It's like I had kind of gotten really cynical with the world, with, if you get your noggin cracked open when you start talking about like crappy stuff your government does, illegal wars, problems with the environment, how they're trying to keep us down, like the man's trying to keep us down. Like that's the story as long as time. But what else is the story as long as time is that, like we always say, the hero's journey, back in the times of Jesus, like the Roman Empire was insanely oppressive to people. They had slave trade, and it's like there was always that person to break the mold of the current situation. And I think a lot of us are like wrapped up in current events, myself included at a time. And I was like, well, damn, like we could have a EMP go off anytime and the grid could go down, and who gives a shit about trying anymore if they could just pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. But that's very, very dangerous. And people are always like, conspiracy theories are dangerous. I think conspiracy theories are awesome and incredibly entertaining, and it allows you to critically think, aside from the masses. But what I think is dangerous is the doom pill mentality of like, nothing matters. We're just a mind in a meat suit floating on a rock in space. I could die anytime. No one will ever care about me. And in 100 years, no one will ever remember my name. And it's like, dude, that is the most idiotic way of thinking your life, because you were blessed with this gift of consciousness and free will in a lot of cases. And you will have a destiny that's different than your own if you continue to go down a dark rabbit hole. So I think it's good to be aware. It's good to be heads up. But for me, like the last couple of years, I mean, I was freaking glued to the wrong profiles on Instagram. I was looking at war videos, at really violent stuff. Like, and I was just like, dude, this is crazy. Like, I need to get ready for something. But in the past 6 months, I think that my chemical regeneration in my brain and in my soul has been wondrous. Like, I don't think about that stuff anymore because it's always been there since the beginning of time. There's always been a force that is trying to keep humanity down. But on the other hand, there's always a force that's trying to bring humanity up. And I want to be a part of that force that's trying to bring people up instead of being caught in the middle of that war.
No, it's really well said, and I think universally people who are in, I'll lump our generations together, like young people.
Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
were fortunate to kind of quickly realize that, all right, everything on the general normal squawk box of the TV is probably bullshit. It's all scripted. We can tell that like
Mm-hmm.
CNN and Fox are saying the same things. They just have different
Sure.
logos. And so like this
Mm-hmm.
camp goes over there, this camp goes over there. But it's no better. And I've had to come to this realization for myself. It is no better to replace that with the doom and gloom of whatever esoteric Twitter account you follow that's telling you about, the lizard people and like the doom and gloom about all the elites. Like, quite frankly, I believe a lot more of that camp as far as what I think is happening. As far as like, I do think
Mm-hmm.
there are a group of people that control the world. They've done it for a long time. The banks are
Same.
set up to do X, Y, and Z, whatever. And it gets really scary. Like when you first find that stuff out, it's like, wow, almost everything is out of my hands. Like there's kind of
Yeah.
this, I know the Matrix trope's been used. There's a system out there that is totally designed and set up against me. However,
Mm-hmm.
comma, um, there's just this massive, it's a loss. And the truth is, fear is always the control mechanism. So if you allow
Yes.
fear to enter through whatever the gateway to you is, then you've lost again. You haven't escaped
Yes.
anything. You just traded the way it's getting to you. And so for me, I
100%.
literally like, it was easy to like turn off the news, turn off sports, like get away from all of those
Mm-hmm.
accounts. But
Yeah.
even recently, it's like I just block entirely stuff that I see, like Twitter, entire
Mm-hmm.
word categories, entire whatever. And you just,
Yeah.
it's amazing how much of that world doesn't exist when you don't allow it to exist in your mind. And that goes into a little bit of the metaphysics, like, is the world coming from us, to us,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But we don't have to go there because I think it loses a lot of people that way. I live in that I live in that camp for sure. I think that, the world is a projection of our mind, but even if you're just like very concrete, like there is reality happening and I'm observing it, that's fine. So don't
Mm-hmm.
observe anything that hurts your
Right.
experience. And quite frankly, the changing cycles of who sits in the chair and who's telling you what X, Y, and Z, like it barely affects you. Like the gas price is going to bounce $1 up or down or whatever. Like,
Yep.
and the truth of the matter is, if you're sweating whatever, like whether it's the collapse of the dollar, CBDCs, like stuff that is really, really scary, does you being fundamentally fearful and then not chasing your dream because of it change that happening? No. Like
It actually doubles down on what they want.
exactly, because fear is the control
Yeah.
mechanism.
And it's so crazy you say that, Zach, and you're, like I said, blowing my mind and not trying to fluff you up a little bit, but like what you just said, as far as like, even if you take both sides of the Fox and the CNN and you focus on like crazy lizard people and, certain families that run the world, so to speak, you are doing exactly what they want. Exactly what they want. And it took me a long time to realize it. I thought that by gaining certain knowledge that other people didn't have, or communicating with people who were seeking like knowledge, that I was somehow gaining an upper hand on this like situation that we find ourselves in. But then, you take a hard look in the mirror and you're like, no, I'm actually not pursuing my goals. I'm depressed. I'm, drinking way too much. I'm fucking smoking my life away because I want to feel better about a situation that's out of my control. But dude, yeah, like you said, every time, because I follow all these accounts and like Instagram's got a weird algorithm, so like occasionally it'll pop up and you're like, oh, I forgot I was following this crazy footage of Ukrainians and Russians like blowing each other's heads off. Unfollow, like crazy stuff. So I think that it's good to be prepared. And I say self-reliance strategist because I've helped a lot of people, friends and family alike, to get in a position that if something out of their control does happen, having a plan. I think that's incredibly important. That goes back to, the idea of love and abundance. Cause it's like, if something does happen, like a COVID shutdown, we've experienced that a couple years ago, shelves empty, you know, people fighting over gasoline during like pipeline shutoffs or whatever, like having a plan and being like, okay, well, I don't have to leave the house for a couple of days. Like I'm good. Like that provides a sense of peace instead of like another jolt of fear that you don't need in your life. And I think that I've rearranged my mind and my mindset about that pretty recently, actually, about like I said, it's all about having that abundance mindset. And if you don't need to freak out about something, then don't, because it's only gonna, force your brain to think it's smoking 15 cigarettes in a day because of the cortisol.
Yeah, a really helpful kind of mental model that for a while it took me it was hard for me to integrate with a lot of what I like was learning about abundance mindset, like feeling into the positivity to bring it and attract it towards yourself. Like I was like, how do you not just put your head in the sand and acknowledge that there are things that could potentially happen outside of that and be prepared? And so the mental model take it from the Stoics, and I really like the Stoics because it's just very digestible philosophy.
For sure.
There's definitely interesting history there, whether or not they existed / was it rewritten, whatever. But I think we could just take it as is. And the concept is premeditatio malorum, which is the premeditation of bad things happening. And it's, for a while I was like, how do you reconcile only focusing your attention and energy on things you want to bring into your life, focusing on abundance? And is this almost counter? Is this idea of meditating on what could happen negatively? Is that counter? But the way that they kind of phrase it is that it's like, it's self-assured confidence that you could handle it if it arrives. So instead of just putting your head in the sand and being ill prepared, the quote from, I'm going to say it's Seneca. He says like, basically like the wise man thinks ahead of time about whatever it could happen because he's not too arrogant to assume that it couldn't go his way. Completely butchering the quote, but the concept is super, super practical because you are just analyzing and thinking through like, okay, what are the ways that this could go bad, whether it's making a massive pivot in business or making a huge investment or moving a state. Like, don't just assume that you can just do things in life without consequences, but be totally self-assured in that literally whatever came to me, I can handle it and I'll be prepared for it. So me thinking about it ahead of time is just giving me a little bit of a tool set so that I react less emotionally in the moment and I can save myself the time, energy, money, whatever, if something wrong, quote unquote wrong, were to happen in the moment or maybe against expectation.
Dude, nailed it. I don't know if that quote was accurate or not, but no, it definitely, you nailed it, man. Like that, whether it was Seneca who said it or not, I don't know, but I've never heard the quote, but what did it say? Premeditis malorum? Is that what you said?
Premeditatio malorum.
Exactly. That's what I meant. It's about like, the idea that I think that a lot of people have that mentality of like, it could never happen to me until it does, and there's also people which blows my mind. It's like, oh, it could never happen to me, but if it does, I don't care. I've lived a good life. And it's like, where did that primitive drive for like self-sustainment and preservation go in people? I don't know. It's not my choice, or, I think for a long time I tried to change people in my life who thought that way, and that just got nowhere. It just like started clashes and just wasn't cool. But I think that, back to the whole creating struggles in your life to feel like you're living that hero's journey is like, I think that comes really down to like a very caveman essence of like, I need to be prepared to fight and survive if an event does happen. But if it doesn't, then I don't need to use that skill, but it's good to have,
Yeah, I think there's never anything wrong about having like competencies. I think where it turns into almost like a mental masturbation is like overly prepping, like the people who are digging out concrete bunkers and like stocking up years worth of food. I heard a really interesting take on that with like the doomsday prepper thing on a podcast one time, and somebody was like, if you're taking all of those steps in preparation, like action expresses priority, but it also expresses belief. So somewhere deep inside of you, you're wanting that to happen so that you can like literally be like, I fucking told you guys, which is really kind of scary to think about.
That is scary, man. That's so crazy that you said that. And actually, your podcast is the first time I've ever heard mental masturbation. And I've literally like, it stuck with me for so long because I was like, dude, that's exactly what I was doing. I was like fantasizing about a collapse where I could be like freaking, it could be Mad Max. And then I didn't really like think about the horror which would result in something like that, the lawlessness, what have you. And there was actually this when I lived in Denver, there was a listing that was like right on the Wyoming border, and it was an old missile silo from back in the day, and like this couple back in like probably the 80s bought it because it was decommissioned, and they'd since passed away, which sadly, but they had the most insane stockpiles of expired food that they literally lived in a bunker built by the government, expired food. They never had to use it. So they spent their entire life expecting and probably wanting something to happen just to be like, we're good and we don't have to worry about the masses coming knocking on our door. And it's like, that is sad. That to me is like just like a slap in the face of the creator to just be like, I want my existence to be centered around the preparation for my demise, as opposed to I want my existence to be, a celebration of the gifts that I've been given in this holy world that we live in, and be able to share it with as many people as I can. So I think that I was caught going down that kind of darker path and, really kind of abandoning my destiny, so to speak. So here we are now. I have like a healthy respect for what could happen, but I'm not thinking about it anymore, which to me has been life changing, life saving, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can kind of take one step of abstraction or extrapolation and realize that all that focusing on a preparation for this potential future, whether it's good or bad, like think about saving for retirement or prepping for doomsday, both of those similar in concept, is that you're totally missing the mark on just being in the moment. Like, you will get there. And it doesn't mean blow every free penny you have at the club every day just because today's it, man. Like, throw it all. You have to operate with some level of faith that there is probably going to be a tomorrow, but also make sure that there's that balance. And that's why I love the reminder of Memento Mori, because you kind of have an accounting statement every single day. Like, was that a good enough last day? And for the amount of time that I'm like a vital young man and I get the privilege to continue to wake up, if my answer isn't great every night, I can slightly course adjust every day. What was different? What would I have liked to do differently? Okay, a little bit more time in the sun, a little bit less time bitching and moaning with a shitty conversation with a frustrating parent, or, like maybe I need to do less work on the business per day so that I can be more present and spend more time at the gym or just hang out with friends. Like it's tough. Like there's a balance to line or a balance to ride with working towards an idyllic future, but also being in the present moment. And I think, like you have touched on, but we didn't really go into, is that the answer lies in how you set up intentionally that everyday practice, because life only comes to you one day at a time. So the way that you build an abundant future is just stack a bunch of really individually effective and abundant days in a row. And then you'll just wake up one day and all the things that you had on your list are just there. But you also didn't miss the, like, I enjoyed the ride part.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for anybody who's having trouble when they're listening to this and being like, where are these guys going with it? Like, how can I relate to this? But it's like those little building blocks of your days and your routine of getting you to where you want to be. That's like a really easy way to think about it. For me personally, is like, how do I want to build the ideal physique? Well, I have to go super consistent in the gym with progressive overload and eating right and doing X, Y, and Z. And so for me, like, I was really good at keeping my physique in check because it was the one thing that I knew how to like identify and visualize and like really had experience in. But I never had experience in building the life that I wanted. Like I have really awesome parents and they were able to retire, you know, in their 60s. And that's why they were able to come visit me in Montana for a week. But, you know, shout out to mom and dad. You guys gave me a really loving household, but never once have they been like, who do you want to be? Not just what do you want to be? What do you want to study? Where do you want to go to college back in the day? Like, who do you want to become? And they tried, but I don't think they knew how to communicate that to their children because they were never communicated to them by their, you know, World War II era family members. Like my dad's mother was born in 1919. And so they were really just trying to survive. And so I think that in order to pass along the gifts that I've been given physically or mentally, what have you, is I have to build a foundation for the next generation. Because like at a time I thought I never wanted to have kids, like the world sucks, blah, blah, blah. But like being 30 has nothing to do with the fact that one day I do want kids. I want there to be success in my bloodline for the next generation that could have it better than I did. So not just like, oh, he has a better education than my grandmother in 1919, but he has a better education on life and of the spiritual journey so that they don't have to, you know, mentally abuse themselves in a world that doesn't quite get them in order to become happy. Like try to give them like a little Spark Notes edition of, you know, life if I could.
Yeah, man, I think about being a dad actually all the time, and like how do I try to set up my kids for success as much as possible. And I think we have to continue to fight like the ooga booga animal brain, which is like compile resources, like get my kids as much money as possible, like build the sovereign homestead, all this stuff. Like that is great, and that will leave the, you know, basal animal needs. It'll get them out of the fear state, their like survival state. But very quickly, it's super important to also imbue those lessons, the value structure, the perspective, and really like if we go into like the psychology of it all, children and human beings, they just want to, as far as emotional support, they just want to feel seen and heard, like when they're developing.
Yeah.
And it's why we have these like crazy complexes. And like when I go back to look at my childhood and like, why am I this like overachiever? Why do I show up this way in relationships? Why do I have this like lack of sense of worthiness? It's like somewhere there was a younger version of me that didn't feel seen and heard unless he did something, unless he achieved X, Y, and Z, like sports team, leadership position, grades, whatever. And so like I checked boxes my entire life, like only to now in my, you know, early 20s, like starting to come to this realization that like I was always worthy of love, and I'm worthy of love just by being. And the more of the being I can be, the more authentic I can express, the more I can write like myself, speak like myself, and help other people do the same. Like that is my quote unquote worthiness of love. So it like, if you don't want to fuck your kid's psyche up, just be around, ask them questions, listen, like smile when they talk to you, see how they feel. Like for me, it's like children are so awe-inspiring that I don't think that will particularly be hard, but I can't speak from experience. And I also know that there's going to be points of frustration. So I'm trying to just spend as much time and years preparing myself so that I can show up in abundance. Like there's an amazing quote from The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. It's like my pin tweet, and I kind of want to, I'm going to pull it up just because it's too good to misquote.
Dude, that's powerful. What you just said, man. Seen and be heard. It's everything.
So this, the quote goes, "To say I love you, one must first know how to say the I. The meaning of the I is an independent, self-sufficient entity that does not exist for the sake of any other person. A person who exists only for the sake of his loved one is not an independent entity, but a spiritual parasite. The love of a parasite is worth nothing." And after I quoted that, I said, self-discovery is the most noble and others-focused work you could do. Selfishness as selflessness.
Damn.
And it's
That's
just
powerful.
It's so foundational. It's like the working thesis of my work is be the Renaissance. Like,
Mm,
we believe in this future possibility of a more vital and bright tomorrow. We all want to sign up for this movement. The truth is, the movement is you. You are the best work you could ever work on. And if you want to show up
mm,
as an abundant father figure, a great partner, a great business person, you have to take the journey inward, because you can't pour from an empty cup or a half full cup and have an expectation that your experience isn't going to dissolve into just chaos and madness. Like, it's biblical. There's a ton of different words for it, but the Bible says it really well. It's like, my cup overflows. And when your cup is overflowing, you can give it to so many other people. But if it's not,
hell
if
yeah.
you're just pouring from this perpetually barely full or empty cup, it's self-defeating. And I mean, that sometimes sheer will can drag that out for however many years. Like, maybe you can just
Yeah.
muster it up to do the bare minimum to bring home money for the
Hmm.
family, whatever. But the brakes fall off at some point, and like, I'm getting to I'm not going to air out my family story, but like, I'm getting to witness it pretty clearly. And so I'm just not going to be too
Mm.
arrogant to assume that I'm any different. And that's why I'm so focused on the world of the self.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. The cup overfloweth, but you got to be a well and not a cup. You got to be a spring of that love. And I think that, not to air my family story out either, but I think that we all have similarities with our upbringings that we can, whether you grew up in a completely different household or a very similar household, it all comes from the same lack of something, whatever that may be. It could be in a more like severe nature in other cases than my own, for example. But being able to, I thought I kind of dabble with the idea of reincarnation and experiencing your karma over and over again. I think that's a very interesting concept. It doesn't go hand in hand with like a Christian faith and upbringing, but I think that there's, I've had experiences on psychedelic journeys and whatnot that have been, very eye opening. That it's like you're experiencing this form of yourself and you're very lucky, very, very fortunate. But at the end of the day, it's really not for you. It's for somebody else that can experience your love, whether that's a friend, a significant other, a child, just being able to learn from your past mistakes in your life and in past lives, whether you believe in it or not. I believe that 10 years ago when I was getting into all that trouble, that is a past life for me. So I can learn from that. And so back to what you said about it's hard to pour from a half full cup or a barely empty cup. In order for people to truly experience the beauty of life, like you have to be a spring, be able to draw that love from something other than yourself, because we are finite creatures. We die, we turn to dust, Memento Mori. And like being able to draw from an eternal source is paramount to your success, so to speak, as a father, son, brother, you name it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I love that others focused perspective, because it's important. And I mean, the quote previous touched on it for sure, being like, you can't love somebody else or like show up in true love until you self-love.
Mm,
I'm a big quote guy. I'm enamored by the words of people smarter and more articulate than me. So I'll end with one more quote before I get into kind of the closer for this podcast. I want to be both
sure.
respectful of your time and also give us room to have another part of this if we want to in the future, as well as
I'd
allow
love to.
people to digest the message, because I think it's been really special. But this last quote is from David Data's Way of the Superior Man, and it might be my favorite quote, which is high praise.
Damn.
It says, "You were born as a sacrifice, and you either participate in the sacrifice, dissolving into the giving of your gift, or you can resist it, which is your suffering."
Damn. Yo, man,
Yeah, it's
what a G.
I know. I don't want to muddy the waters by saying anything else. It's so powerful. But
Speaks for itself, man.
exactly. So on this podcast, I know, knowing that you've listened, I assume you know what's coming, but I typically like to ask these three closer questions. I know we haven't specifically drifted into the world of the masculine and the feminine specifically,
Mm.
but I am curious, in your eyes, what defines being a man?
Ooh, I was not expecting that one, so I'm just gonna wing it. Aside from the physical characteristics of a man, about being able to be strong and fast, I think there are certain people who don't have that ability for certain reasons that are out of their control. But I think the ability to be a man and what defines a man is honesty and giving and the ability to sacrifice something that they already have for something who needs it more than they do,
Hmm,
and protecting the innocent of human life. Yeah, we'll go with that.
I like that. It's I love to hear these answers, and it's so cool now that I've been doing it. I think your episode's going to be either 39, 40, or 41, and I mean, I love adding to that library, and it's so amazing because everyone kind of phrases it differently, but there's just like such a beautiful
Mm,
through line, and I can't wait. I imagine in the future, like whenever I'm hanging up the cleats, like there's going to be some really cool way to kind of compile all of the answers and then write some really
mm,
cool story about it. But it's amazing because like I don't know, by hearing everybody answer it and hearing similar shades of the truth, like it points to that underlying truth. So I love that answer. Um,
amazing.
the second question is, if you could go back to a younger version of yourself and tell him one thing, what would that be?
Wow. Oh man. Don't care about what anybody else thinks about you. Love yourself, identify who you are and who you want to be, and stay consistent and don't falter course.
Mm, I love that. I think every young man needs to hear that from his future self. Um, and then the final is, as we've discussed, I'm a big quote guy. What is one quote that's always stuck with you or that you try to live by?
Oh man. Oh man. There's so many. Try not to drag this out, but I think what I try to live by is love thy neighbor. That goes to like a biblical meaning, but just to like expand because it's pretty tropey, I would say. But I'm always the one like kind of chatting randos up like at a restaurant or in the street, and like I think that is something that I live by because it's like I don't love them, but I treat them with the same respect that I would want to be treated, and be engaged in their life, whether it's someone passing on the street or a coworker or whoever, and just to be able to like encourage them to do the same. I think the world would be a better place for sure.
Completely agree. It really does speak to the like letting people be seen thing. Just like
Hmm.
breaking these automatized routines and just being like, hey, like I see you, like you're doing a good job today, you look great, whatever. It
Yeah.
changes everything. And I don't want to again drift too much as these are the closers theoretically, but um the I've always said that like a smile and or a compliment is one of like the most disproportionately high ROI things in humanity. Like
Mm,
it is the demonstration of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, if there ever was one, because it costs you damn near nothing to just smile at someone or lob a compliment. Like you could literally just fake it. You could make it up, but like it'll change their day. You know, like
hell
if
yeah.
like somebody walks by and just like, hey, you're looking big, man, or like I like your hair or like your beard or like whatever, like that you'll remember that for the rest of the day. They'll forget about it like probably 2 minutes later. And so it's just like those little acts of kindness and showing up for love constantly is it's crazy, but so high.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, man. And like not trying to dissuade or go away from the closers, but like how dudes have like a weird like dynamic in the gym. Everyone's like in the zone and like getting pumped and like testosterone and like people are kind of eyeing each other and like there's like that quote of like the gym enemy. But it's like if you see someone who's like eyeing you, just like go up and be like, dude, you're a beast, bro. And like I did that the other day to some guy and he was like, and now we're like buds, just like creating that like, dude, you're a beast bridge between human beings is like I got you. Can you spot me?
That is funny. I'm sure a very universally felt experience by many of the listeners that have soldiered on to an hour and a half with us, which I always like to acknowledge the people that make it this far. Thank you for listening. I hope and can pretty confidently say that you found something valuable in this conversation, at least just the overall pleasant nature and positivity that I think we were able to touch on, both with your story and my responses to it. I hope that I also want to say thank you for spending your time. This is incredible. I'm excited to now have you in my life to whatever degree that looks like in the future, like have another person in my corner and doing work, like sharing the arena, as I proverbially like to say.
Amen.
It's really special. And like you said, we need more people doing the good work and just sharing that positive message and coming from abundance. So that being said, let the people know kind of what you're working on / where they can find you, because I'm sure they're curious.
Yeah. And just to touch on what you said, man, thank you so much. And I'm very much looking forward to the same thing. And so we'll be in touch for sure. But you can find me primarily on Instagram. My background is like fitness model, so I have like a lot of sort of content out there, but definitely reach out to me if you heard my story and are sharing something similar and need someone to talk to. I'll be there for you. But I am working on a little bit of a business venture here up in Montana. I'm not going to get too deep into it because it's kind of in the embryonic phase, and but it involves the call of the wild and Montanan wilderness. So I will be in touch with that. Maybe the next podcast I'll have something set in stone. Who knows?
Exciting, brother. I would love to return to Big Sky Country, and hopefully this new venture invites me. Very
it will.
pleased to spend the time with you. Obviously, anyone who is listening to this, you're hearing it either Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, so you can continue to follow along more episodes. And I keep promising content diversity. It is coming. I'm balancing a lot of hats, but yeah, just stay tuned on those platforms for more podcasts. Don't plan to stop anytime soon. And then you can follow myself at ZDSCHENKEN on Twitter and Instagram, as well as Vitruvian Gentleman on Instagram if you're interested in the content I'm writing, more of my thoughts on a daily basis. And likewise, reach out if anything resonated specifically, you just need somebody to talk to. Like, do not try to do life alone. It is something that I can probably confidently say that you would regret trying to do. So just take the advance on your future self and reach out for help, whether it's me or somebody around you. And I appreciate you guys spending your most valuable resources, that being time and attention, with myself and David today. Memento Mori, and I will see you on the next episode of the Vitruvian Man podcast.
Thanks, guys.
And if he fails, at least fails while daring greater, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.